Alrighty, okay, let's begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Erica. I'm the vice chair for Mustard Seed Project, and just kicking off our second round of the community forum series. And today we're going to focus on the foster care system and homelessness. So tonight on the next slide, there's a little agenda for what's going to be the entire meeting. First, just going to briefly overview, what MSP or Mustard Seed Project is and what we do. And then we're going to introduce our panelists, have our keynote speaker speak, and finally open everything up for a discussion-based Q&A. So, who is Mustard Seed Project? Who we are, this is our mission statement. Our mission is guided by a hand-up, not handout philosophy. And our goal is to connect unsheltered and low-income individuals to services and programs through community organization, relationship-based outreach, and volunteer case management. And going a little deeper into what each of these are, community organization, for example, our community forum series, as well as other things that we do is really just, mobilize our students at their universities to begin educating the public, as well as mobilize groups of volunteers to just learn about homelessness and serve the community. We do things like clothing drives, fundraisers, and education events such as these. Our other aspect is our relationship-based outreach. There is where we consistently conduct street outreaches, oftentimes partnering with local agencies or even just going out ourselves. And it's more than just really, handing out items and walking away. It's a little bit, we like to push for a lot of our volunteers to really, develop and foster kind of communication and talking to the people that we serve, handing out the necessary items that they kind of request. And if anything, as one of our volunteers even put it in a beautiful, beautiful way, where it's just us finding a way of putting love into the world and showing others compassion and respect. And finally, our third aspect to a lot of what we do is a little bit of the magic that is MSP. With it is our volunteer service navigation. This program is a free opt-in, opt-out service for those experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Each client is matched up with one of our trained volunteer service navigators, who provides supplementary support to assist clients in pursuing their housing goals. The main things are it's low barrier to the client. There's a max caseload of 5 clients to 1 service navigator, very person-centered, and there's a super low burnout rate amongst our volunteers. And this is kind of like the scope of practice that we have that we cover is resume building, checking in weekly, connection to the various community services in the area that really pertain to what an individual is looking for or needing. Our community relief fund, which is a big thing that I'll get into in the next slide, and also even helping assist applications to either local services, government services, and even things such as school, GED, and etc. So with the community relief fund, this is a lot of our fundraising efforts go towards funding this fund, and it's pretty much emergency money for homelessness prevention and housing tenancy, and specifically has been utilized for the following, which is our rental subsidies, healthcare subsidies, basic needs such as food, clothing, etc., transportation subsidies, and personal enrichment, which can vary from furniture to certain technology, or even education like services. And in 2021, which was last year, we provided just over $18,000 to 57 clients, and the average payment was around $300-ish, $326.97. And of that, we were managed to prevent a homeless situation via rental subsidies or rental assistance to 25 households, which is amazing. And before I get into the next step, I just want to reiterate that a lot of what we do, this is a fruit of love. This is us putting love into the world, and just everyone in this organization, we're all volunteers, we're not paid at all. And the majority, if not all of us, are pretty young, we're college students or really early in a career professionals, and we're just finding ways to give back and do what we can. And with that, and with this community forum, a lot of what me especially, and I know lots of people within Mustard Seed Project, we come to this space to really just learn more and elevate, the voices of those with either lived experience, professional experience, or a combination thereof. And so today we have an awesome, awesome line of speakers, and I invite everyone to really just come in to listen and open your minds and open your hearts. And with that, I am going to hand off to Sienna and Gabby. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Oh, sorry, Sienna. In a second here, we are going to introduce our panelists. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about what the Community Forum series is and some ground rules. So we are doing this once a month from January until June. So there are a couple more opportunities where we talk about various other topics, if you guys are interested in that also. Our goals for the series are to educate the public about systems that perpetuate homelessness, highlight various intersecting identities and experiences, bringing together and elevating voices to engage in this dialogue, and transform conversations into actions. And last thing before we get started are just some ground rules. Please, in the era of Zoom, mute yourself when you're not talking. Use the raise hand feature before unmuting to ask a question, or write your question in the chat box. Next, hate will not be tolerated here in MSP's space. And with that, please be respectful of our panelists and your fellow attendees. And the last rule is more of an ideal, right? This is an open and safe space for respectful discussion and for learning. So now here is the registration page where you probably signed up for this. You can also make a donation here, although it is not necessary. We very much appreciate it. It really helps us do work on the ground and get people into housing and wherever they need to be. And I will turn it over to our panelists to please introduce yourselves. Let's start with Jaymi.
All right. Hi, my name is Jaymi Matranga. I work in child welfare, and I am also a former foster youth. So I can talk more about that a little bit later, but that's generally who I am. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jaymi. Happy to have you. All right. Next, we have Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Watson. I'm the Executive Director of Mental Health America, and I've worked in many agencies working with foster youth and homeless individuals. So I have an extensive experience and knowledge base around many challenges, many issues, the benefits of some key services to support homeless individuals and foster youth.
Wonderful. Thank you. And last but not least, Larry.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Larry Banks, Family Engagement Specialist with the YMCA's Permanent Connections Program. I'm also a former foster youth as well, and I am happy to be here.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you all. All right, so we are going to move on and start with our keynote speaker, Jaymi.
Well, 1 second. Right, just before we get to Jaymi, I want to make sure that we offer the space to Daphne to talk a little bit more about what MHA is before we get into our keynote speaker for the night. So Daphne, if you want to share a little bit more about what MHA is.
Well, I'm sure. Mental Health America is an organization that's really dedicated to addressing mental health challenges from prevention and all the way to early intervention, treatment, and aftercare. We have some key programs that we know really address the needs of people who oftentimes been marginalized or left behind, and usually those individuals are communities of color, and those individuals often have not been able to access care in a way that's beneficial to them. So we have key programs, like one of our keynote programs is Mental Health First Aid, that teaches individuals and young people, adults, in various languages, how to address a mental health crisis. How do you help this person who you love, or in your family, or a coworker, or friend? How do you help them address their mental health crisis? It might be anxiety or some depression, or even much more chronic conditions. The program is free for individuals to get certified as mental health first aiders. And it's a wonderful program. It gives you the tools that you need to be able to assist them. Also, one of the key programs that we recently started was called FERS. It's really a state hotline for foster youth to call if they need assistance. And it provides assistance 24 hours, 7 days a week. And we really try to address whatever the crisis may be. The foster youth can call, the parent can call, adoptive parent calls. We will respond to all of the calls that come through the state hotline. And we will assist them in addressing whatever the crisis is, assist them in getting stabilized, whatever resources they need. We are available to them 7 days a week, 24 hours during the day. We have key partners throughout the whole county, so we serve the whole county. And that program really is a flagship program for the county because it really will help ensure that foster youth are not bounced around from home to home or place to place, but can be stable and be involved in a loving, caring home. We also have a fatherhood program, which helps fathers become active, engaged fathers in the lives of their children, so the kids do not end up in very difficult circumstances. So we work with the fathers and the mothers and really provide a lot of support services and assistance to the kids. And then we do a lot of community just advocacy. We've done a lot around COVID. We've done a lot around whatever community issues that we see during the day. Do a lot of advocating and connect people to lots of the resources that are necessary throughout the county. One key thing we believe in is that communities of color really need to be supported in a way that really works for them. So traditional services sometimes miss the mark. So it has to be done in a culturally appropriate, culturally honoring way. We really want to make sure that people are receiving the support that they can really internalize in their lives in a real way. We do this, we've been in San Diego since 1960, providing a lot of different services to be able to help people address mental health issues, get the support they need, and really live productive and happy lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We appreciate it. Well, we wanted to make sure that we started out today's forum just sharing resources that are available to the general population. So we wanted to just make sure that everyone's aware of what Mental Health America San Diego does and the resources that are available to you and maybe people that you know. So we wanted to get that information out there. But without further ado, we will begin with our keynote speaker, Jaymi.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's my understanding that the majority of people here are on a voluntary basis because you want to learn, you want to grow, and that's really admirable to take time out of your day to do that. And so I appreciate you being here, being willing to learn and help our community. As mentioned, I'm Jaymi Matranga. My personal experience with foster care and homelessness is that I am a former foster youth. So I was in and out of the system throughout my childhood, and it really shaped a big part of who I am. I also experienced homelessness, but as a child. I did not age out and experience homelessness then, but I did have experience with it as a child with my biological parents, and that was in San Diego as well. So a lot of the shelters that you all connect with, I lived in them and I remember those days. And then also I am a foster and adoptive parent as well. So I have 7 kids and 2 grandchildren, actually. I became a grandmother at the age of 26. Our daughter that we adopted through foster care is a teen mom. And so we have a pretty busy life at home, but we love it. My husband and I typically say yes to the placements that unfortunately most would label as hard to place or unadoptable. And we really have a heart for those kids. And that's where we've found our passion at home in our personal lives, and we love our family. And then professionally, I am a social worker with Child Welfare Services. I graduated with my master's degree in social work in 2019. Throughout my education, it was pretty much always child welfare focused. So I did 4 years of internship in child welfare and policy and management, which is what my master's degree is in. And then I've worked with child welfare for the past 3 years since I graduated with my master's degree. And so that's something I'm extremely passionate about. I work in investigations. So really the first contacts that a family has with our agency besides the hotline. So I do a lot of stabilization, resource connection, making sure that the family is preserved, to do everything we can to keep them together and stable and safe. And so community resources are really, really important to social workers. I cannot do my job unless I'm aware of programs like Mental Health America and other things that can help stabilize our families. Also, I'm glad that she mentioned FERS, or the Family Urgent Response System. When that was rolling out, us as social workers, before we had a contract, would go out on them. And so I was part of the first team of 10 people to be a part of FERS. So I'm pretty familiar with that, and it's so needed. I can speak to that, especially as a foster parent. Unfortunately, a lot of times when kids are in mental health crisis, the only default before FERS was to call the police. And then you have the foster care to prison pipeline, and you have foster parents or group homes that have no other resource but to press charges or to call the police or PERT, which has its own set of issues. So FERS really came in and changed a lot of that, where now there's this hotline where we can have trained mental health professionals come out and support kids in crisis. But more than that, I really wanted to talk about the correlation between foster care and homelessness. Am I able to share my screen to share some statistics?
Yes, I am making you co-host right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So let me pull this up. I just have a couple slides I wanted to share. Okay. So these are just some common statistics. If you work in this population, you might be aware of them, but most people are not. In California, more than 1 in 4 foster youth reported experiencing at least one day of homelessness. So that's a pretty substantial number, especially when you compare it to the general population of young adults that experience homelessness. It's substantially higher. These are kids that have either spent time in foster care or who have aged out that report experiencing homelessness. And 30% have said that they've either couch surfed or crashed with friends because they didn't have anywhere else to go. So some of these kids did not identify as someone experiencing homelessness, but they rather identify as someone who has couch surfed or crashed with friends. And so that number, from the 1 to 4 number, is actually probably a lot higher. And immediately upon aging out of foster care, 25% of foster youth in California will immediately become homeless. It's the day that their court case is terminated, jurisdiction is closed, they're then homeless without a plan. And more than 50% of the general homeless population reports that they've spent some time in foster care. And some research has shown that that's actually up to 80%. So the general homeless population that we see, most of them statistically have spent some time in foster care, whether that's a day, whether that's years, and that's extremely significant. When we talk about the reasons that a lot of this happened, I'm sure that a lot of you can guess and imagine a lot of it has to do with support systems, not having someone to fall back on. I think the majority of us can think of at least one person who would let us sleep on their couch or take us in if we were homeless. And foster youth a lot of times don't have that. They're either in group homes or in foster placements that can't keep them past 18, or what extended foster care is, which is 21, or they just don't have any connections at all, or they have connections that aren't able to help them. And so a lot of times we see kids that are really bright, really smart, have a great future, and they get accepted to college. But then during the summers and the winter breaks, when they're out of their dorms, they have nowhere to go. They might have a scholarship because there's state grants and there's things for foster youth, but what do they do when they don't have those? And so even what the system would label as the most successful youth, when they leave our system, unfortunately are left with less resources than the general population, even if they utilize everything afforded to them, grants, everything that they can. Fortunately, there's been a lot of new legislation to try to combat this. If you are aware, or you may not be, foster care can now extend to 21. So when kids are 17 and a half, they have the option to opt out of foster care or opt in. A lot of youth opt in, and if they opt in to staying in foster care till 21, then they either have to have a job or going to school or addressing barriers that keep them from doing those things. So for example, being in mental health services or getting job training or something to that effect. And then they can receive the funds that their foster parents would have previously received. And they can receive support and case management, which sounds really great. But speaking as someone in foster care and also someone that fosters teenagers, most kids, the day they turn 18, they want to be done with the system. And we can't blame them for that. You know, I've spoken with a lot of colleagues without lived experience, and they're just baffled. Why would this child want to give up free money and free case management and free resources the day they turn 18? Because a lot of them are tired of the system. They don't have a good trust in the system. They've experienced social workers or foster parents that disrupt them and move them around and don't meet their needs. And so that's a huge gap that the system's working to address. But along with that, there's this legislation that is all fairly new. So I just pulled the most recent ones. Senate Bill 234 is focused on financing. So a lot of that has to do with grants and forgivable loans for nonprofits to create supportive housing. And 50% of that is supposed to go to 18 to 21-year-olds, which is a lot. We don't normally see that big of a percentage. There's another similar bill out right now where it earmarked 10%, and that's even a lot. So for this bill to earmark 50% is very, very significant. There was another bill that passed last year that required DSS, which is our Department of Social Services over the state, to convene a working group to examine EFC, extended foster care, to make sure that it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And so those recommendations are supposed to be made by every county by this July. And then just as of last month, a couple weeks ago, the governor of California passed AB 546. And this is probably the biggest landmark that could prevent foster youth from immediately becoming homeless. This now requires counties to report a housing plan to the judge before they can leave the system. So previously, the deadline was 18 or 21, and it was a very hard deadline. The day that birthday comes, you're out. It's basically happy birthday, now you're on your own. But now a judge has to be aware of a housing plan for a child, a concrete one, before we can discharge them from our system. So that means we have to keep giving them services until they have a housing plan. It does not require the system to provide housing, but it just requires that they have a plan. So whether that's a relative, a friend, a dorm, something concrete, so that we're not just stepping out and allowing them to become homeless immediately. Some other things that contribute to homelessness among foster youth are, of course, the ACEs, their adverse childhood experiences, the traumatic events that contribute to mental health diagnoses, trauma responses, all of those things that we see in youth that don't set them up well for success if they're untreated. And ideally, if they're in the foster care system, they should be getting support, they should be getting services, but it doesn't always happen, whether that's a social worker blame or a systems failure, or just the resources not available or not having a stable placement. A lot of times these kids aren't equipped to become adults. I look at, as a foster parent, even something as simple as helping my teenagers get their license or their permit. How many approvals that takes, whose car insurance are they going to be on? Am I allowed to let them practice on my car? If something happens, then I assume the liability of that. And as a committed foster parent, those are all things I'm willing to do. But unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of committed foster parents for teenagers, and group home staff aren't able to do that. So these kids are aging out a lot of times without an ID, without a license, without any job training, without a high school diploma, and all of those things contribute to homelessness as well. So those are just some things I wanted to touch on. I know we're going to go into the panel and open up for questions. I want also to say upfront that I'm really open to talking about my lived experience, whether that's in foster care myself or with our family. I am protective of our kids' stories. Of course, those are theirs to tell. But if there's anything that comes up that you want a lived experience view on, I'm more than happy to speak about that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jaymi. I really appreciate you sharing. I think this is a great time. I would love to ask you a question and then open it up to the panel. And I think it fits perfectly with, what you were talking about at the end. How, in your opinion, how can a foster youth be better supported once they turn 18 so they don't have to be forced into a homeless situation?
I think a lot of it has to do with those supportive relationships. So I know in San Diego, we have Promises to Kids, which is a nonprofit that really supports foster youth. And what they do is they set the youth up with a mentor that is supposed to carry them from 17 to 24, or as long as that mentor stays involved. And we've seen a lot of success with that program because even when their social worker steps out, they still have a mentor to follow up on. Programs like FERS, the Family Urgent Response System, that strengthens the relationship between the foster parent and the child or the teenager, is really, really important. Also, education for foster parents is huge, or even caregivers that group home staff or people that maybe they're not in it for the long term, but they want to help a kid in the meantime. Education, trauma training, all of those things are really, really important because we see too often that kids are moved around because of what foster parents see as behaviors when really they're trauma responses. And we see that that does not set up kids for success. But one of the biggest thing is just having supportive services in place. So as a social worker, even in the front end and investigations, even if it's a 2-year-old, I'm looking at how many resources, how many services can I link this family to so that when I step out of the picture, they have support and they have people looking at them and they have people making sure they're okay. And also really just giving them a hand in whatever they need. And those are the kinds of things that our youth need. It's not just the 2-year-old, it's the 18-year-old, it's the 17-year-old. They need services, they need support. And unfortunately, when they're no longer in foster care, a lot of those supports end immediately. So not only are they losing their finances and their case, but they're losing their support system, whether that's their CASA or their social worker or their foster parent, or all of these people, their therapist, these people that they've relied on their whole lives, or they're linked in foster care, or a pediatrician. All of those things are gone the day they turn 18. And that's really scary for a lot of youth. I know that a lot of counties, including our own, have independent living services, ILS, where teenagers are ideally supposed to get independent living services. They're supposed to get a case manager that's specifically assigned to teach them those things. So budgeting, car maintenance, all of those kind of life skills. But again, as I'm sure you know, if you work with any service providers, the quality of those services is highly dependent on the program, dependent on the county, dependent on even the person who's teaching the class. And so I think partially too, uniformity in those policies is really important because especially in California, child welfare varies so much from state to state or even office to office. In San Diego, we have 6 different regions of child welfare. And so uniformity, training, and those kind of universal policies and laws are really important, but ultimately it comes down to the relationship the kids have with people in their life who will support them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Daphne, same question for you. What do you think, how can foster youth be better supported once they turn 18?
Well, it is just like Jaymi said, the foster care at times is, it depends upon the quality of the home, the quality of the system the kids are in. And unfortunately, for some, it's not a great situation. Young people, just like anyone else, whether it be foster care or not, need to have a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. And foster care, unfortunately, fragments that. So emotional stability of the child, really, they struggle because they don't know where they belong, and they don't feel that they belong to anyone. Foster care just plopped this child out of their home, wherever home that they had, and placed them with people that they don't even know. And it just creates its own level of trauma and challenge. So one of the things that the foster care system is striving to do now is really put in place permanency in the homes that they have. They really are striving, even the foster homes, really looking at them as permanency homes so that the kids can feel a sense of connection and belonging. We need more foster parents like Jaymi. Jaymi and her family are doing tremendous work with kids who probably would not have had any support or might have been the kids who end up being homeless. We need quality homes where people will take the kids and not just kick them out when they do something wrong, but hang in there with them when they go through their struggles and challenges like any other child. When I used to work at a state prison, I worked at Donovan State Prison. There was a researcher that did a research on the individuals who came into this level 3 male institution, and 80% of them were former foster youth, had some involvement in foster care. and now they're in a state prison and many of them are doing long sentences there. Many of them had fragmented lifestyles. So after foster care, they had nowhere. And unfortunately, this hanging in the streets and getting involved in the challenges of the streets ended up in prison. So we all need to work hard at changing that dynamics. And it's not just the foster care system that has to really change. We as a community really have to change and embrace and find ways that we can really support young people in foster care and as they exit foster care.
Thank you, Daphne, for sharing. Larry, how about you? What do you think?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, if everyone doesn't know what we do at YFS, Youth and Family Services with the YMCA, before I answer a question, I would like to explain our branch here at the YMCA. YFS, Youth and Family Services, is a branch within the YMCA of San Diego County. A lot of people only see us as a gym, which we're not. We have a wide range of services that we offer throughout the county of San Diego: behavioral and mental health services, family support preservation, traditional housing for young adults, and then also young adult skill development as well. And so we serve about 15,000 individuals each year. And again, a lot of folks don't know that we're here because we're kind of like tucked away in the corner of the YMCA. And specifically, the program that I work for is called Permanent Connections. We have been talking a lot about, tonight we've been talking a lot about housing and support networks and things like that. And so the program that I work for, Permanent Connections, is a program where we are working with foster youth ages 0 to 17, where pretty soon we're going to be working with youth that are aging out as well, but we are working with youth that who don't have a support network. And what we're doing is that we're going out and finding biological family, adult supports that were in their life before and then decided, things happen and they disappeared. And so what we do is that we go out and find them and we preserve that relationship with them. And so when they age out, they have a full support system in place for them before they age out of foster care. Again, we do find biological family, but at the same time, we do also find adults that have been in that child's life and disappeared, or the connection that they had because of the fact that that youth has moved around so many times has gone. And so what we do, and it's just not biological family, it's all any type of support, adult support person that can come into this youth's life, we will preserve that support with them. And so getting back to the fact of homeless youth and things like that, part of our program within Youth and Family Services is that we have transitional housing for youth. And then also with Permanent Connections, when our youth leave out of the system, they're going to have that support network, so that way they either don't go homeless or they have someone that they can stay with, and just preserving that connection with them. Myself, as a former foster youth, I was in foster care from 3 days old all the way to 18 years old, aged out of foster care, and went through transitional housing and had an ILS worker and things like that. I'm very grateful that I had a support network for me. I have 2 mentors who have still been in my life since I was 7 years old, and I'm 29 now, and they're still part of my my support network. And I was able to meet my biological family through a program similar like ours at Permanent Connections, It was through the Casey family programs who had helped ensure me to meet my biological family, because I had never met them before when I turned about 25. And so getting, learning about all these things that are happening with youth that are aging out, it gives me hope for our youth. And so when I aged out of foster care, that was the deadline. 18 years old, you're out. Here's all your paperwork. Here is your here's $500. Here's all the information that you need to go, and here you go. And so I was very, very happy to hear about these new bills that are being passed for foster youth, because again, once you're out, it's hard. And luckily for me, I was able to get into housing through South Bay Community Services and things like that. And and I'm sorry, I was trying to look at your name and I couldn't. Oh, Jaymi. God bless you. You are definitely a inspiration, not only to myself, but a lot of youth. And I'm so glad to hear someone that has been in care, been through it, and then also taking in children that are in definite need of support, especially our teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Teenagers, yeah, and our teenagers, they're the most vulnerable, because a lot of foster parents, they don't want teenagers because of how they behave and things like that. And so my former foster mom, Michelle, there were 8 of us in her home, and we were all teenagers. Hearing the story of foster parents that are taking in teenagers because they're the most vulnerable ones, and they're the most ones that need help the most and need a support such as yourself. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That's one of the things I'm very passionate about as well, is a lot of foster parents are hesitant to take teenagers, especially if they have younger kids in the home. We have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and they love their big sisters, like absolutely love them. And it's been extremely healing for our teenagers to have little kids, because they very much have the mindset of, I don't want what happened to me to happen to them. And so we found it's the opposite. They're extremely protective of our kids. And of course, there's things where our 4-year-old might learn a colorful word here and there, or things that we wouldn't have necessarily exposed them to. But those are things that can be navigated with boundaries, and teenagers are just kids. A lot of the ways in which we de-escalate a toddler by talking them through their feelings and giving them hugs, like teenagers need those things too. Our teenagers, all 3 of our girls that we have right now, the first few months they were there, we said, hey, in our house, like we tuck in our boys, do you guys want to be tucked in too? And they said, yeah. And they wanted a story and they wanted to be tucked in. And those are things that I think foster parents don't think of. They just see a big, scary teenager,
Right.
but they're just kids. And I wish that I could tell everyone, like just give teenagers a chance, because it's not just, oh, well, I'll foster them for a couple of years and then be done. It's a lifelong connection for them.
Right.
So when our teenagers we have 2 girls that we had guardianship of that are now adults, and they come here on Christmas and they call us when they need money or when their car breaks down, or if they need parenting advice because one of them has a baby. And those are things that they don't have another mom for. And so that's what teenagers need. It's more about those supportive connections than anything else. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing all of this insight. We have a couple questions prepared for you, but we just wanted to thank you for your time and your vulnerability today before we move forward. But there was a question in the chat. Thank you, Stacy, for that question. Going back to, you were talking about, Jaymi, just now about, how teenagers are just kids, and they still need to be supported and need to be uplifted. And so Stacy's question was revolving around why aren't foster parents held responsible for ensuring that their 17, 18-year-olds are graduating from high school or GED, and given that support at this age, especially as they may or may not be aging out, stuff of that sense. So why in your opinion, why do you think that the foster parents are not held responsible for these things? Anyone can answer.
I think as a foster parent myself, the answer is pretty much the same as we would require from any other parent. They're required to enroll them in school. They're required to support them in tutoring and get them everything they need. But ultimately, teenagers are also individuals with their own autonomy. And speaking as someone who parents teenagers, one of them is very, very motivated to get a straight A student and go to college. And one of them just wants to go to lunchtime and doesn't want to do her homework and is at risk of not graduating. And that's something that as parents, we support them and we encourage them and we give them all of the tools and resources they can. But ultimately, as a parent too, our job is to empower them to make their own decisions. And unfortunately, that's a toss-up, especially when it's a foster youth. You know, like I can tell them as much as I can every day how important a GED is, how important a high school diploma is, but they're still teenagers. You know, teens are teens. And whether you've experienced trauma or not, there's teenagers who aren't in foster care who just aren't motivated to do school. And so I think it's when we have things like that, like if we hypothetically made a policy, we would hold foster parents accountable somehow for not having their teenager graduate high school. The argument would be that's not really a fair standard when they're teenagers. It would be fair if they're 5 or they're 10 and not going to school. But that's even why the state law, I think, is 16. And in some other states, it's 14, where they can just drop out if they want to. And I think it's because parents have a hard time keeping kids in school. So then you look at quality foster parents should be supporting their mental health, should be supporting them in tutoring, should be giving them all of the tools and reminding them that they can be successful. But they also have a lot of barriers. One of our kids that came to us, she's been in foster care her whole life, and we are her first family placement. She has been in group homes her entire life. And she's switched schools, I think, 27 times. And so for her to be in-person school for the first time in 5 years is very, very challenging for her. And those are things that foster parents, I agree, I should be held accountable for encouraging her and loving her and teaching her and doing the best we can. But as far as holding a completion status and accountability is really difficult to navigate and to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely like a multifaceted situation. So it's important to look at it from all different perspectives of what it means to be a quality like foster parent. And if you're gonna decide to be a foster parent, obviously we need more foster parents out there, but definitely the quality aspect is really important as well. Daphne, relating on that issue, we wanted to ask, I know that we talked on the phone yesterday and you were talking about how MHA really does highlight, early mental health interventions and in relation to, quality foster parenting. Why do you think the early intervention is so important and how that it can kind of relay in the rest of the life of the foster youth?
Well, most of the foster youth that I've ever worked with and I've came across suffered from trauma from their life experience, whether that be because of the grieving of the loss of the parent, the trauma of some police officer coming and just taking you away and taking you to an unknown place creates its own set of trauma. A lot of the kids have lost their connection to their community, their schools, their environment, their siblings. And so there's some early onset of anxiety and depression that comes forth in many of their lives. And so it's so important to give them the support and assistance and avenues so that they can address that trauma in a way that's really effective to them. So Mental Health America, we really strive to do that. One of the programs I used to work with when I was at another agency, much like Larry, was family finding and connecting kids to their siblings or family members that they didn't even know existed, didn't know that even cared about them. When we started connecting them to it, it closed the emotional hole that many of the kids really had been experiencing. They were connected to family members, aunts, uncles, in different states and different places. We found sisters. There was a set of twins. One of the sisters got adopted, the other didn't. Well, now we were able to bring them together. And as young adults, they started living together and caring for one another. So really, foster care really it's a multifaceted kind of environment. And there's a lot of positive things that can be utilized, but we have to bring it together. Still very fragmented. And so sometimes kids get lost in the whole process. But we really have, all of us collectively have to take a look at how we can connect and support foster youth and really helping them really achieve the emotional strength and emotional stability so that they can live productively, as well as if they do have a mental health issue, get it addressed early. Mental illness is something that you can really, if you address early and you get the right treatment, you can live a very successful life. There should be no stigma around mental illness. We all, as I even tell my kids, sometimes we all need a tune-up. We need to talk to somebody. We need to talk to a therapist. We need to address some of the challenges that we have. And really encouraging foster youth to really get that emotional strength they need so that they can be successful. And they need to have a sense of belonging and connection to someone, not for just a short period of time, but for a lifetime. So the things that Jaymi's doing and others do really, really make a significant difference. If the young person can come back and talk to you on the phone and come back to your home and have meals with you, those kinds of things, those are so critical to their emotional well-being. So foster care can't be looked at as an isolated thing. It really has to be looked at its totality. And we have to all insist that foster care really does better for all kids and really helping them to receive the best support and assistance they can receive.
Most definitely, thank you. I like that you mentioned sometimes we'll need a tune-up, and absolutely true. And I think it's very important to address that earlier rather than later, as you know. So you did mention a little bit about biological reunification. So I wanted to ask you about that and then open it up to Larry and Jaymi as well. But in your opinion, do you think that biological reunification is a priority, and why so? And maybe explain a little more about what that is if folks don't know.
It really is a case-by-case situation. Sometimes connecting with biological family members is a very positive thing for young people. Sometimes it's not a healthy thing, and it has to be determined by all the people involved of what's going to be the best support and assistance to the child. I know I was working with a young African-American young man, and he kept on running away from Panelists Center. And he kept on going. Where did he go? He went to grandma's house. He went to his mom's house. So the social worker would come, pick him up. They would pick him up, take him back to Panelists Center. A week or two later, where did he end up? Back at grandma's house or well. So I kept on saying to myself, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I said to the social worker in charge, I said, why don't we find a way we can make grandma's house suitable for him, because he keeps going back there. And if that's really where he wants to be, as soon as he turns 18, that's where he's going to go anyway. So how do we help grandma's house be acceptable enough and identify what are the issues that the worker sees as a problem, help mitigate it. And after a while, we got into the place where people weren't just saying this kid is incorrigible and just running away in 5 minutes and really getting caught up into that emotion, but yet not understanding this child really belonged to that family and felt he needed a place to belong. So eventually we got there, and they placed the child back with his grandmother. So it really takes a lot of the process of really looking at permanency in all of its facets so that kids can really have an opportunity to belong and connect with others.
Absolutely, thank you. How about you, Larry? What do you think?
Honestly, with how I feel is, it's more trying to make sure, just like Ms. Daphne said, was making sure that we have, when our youth are leaving out of care, making sure that they have a permanency plan, having a support network for them, because once they age out and they don't have that permanent plan, it's up in the air. And so I think the more that we get our youth connected to adult supports in their life, and if there's like a specific youth that has been disconnected from their family completely, and they're always talking about an Aunt Jean or grandma or uncle, we need to find ways to get them back connected to them. I know sometimes with our protective service social workers, it becomes kind of a concern or anything like that. But these kids still need their parents in their life. Supervised visits, if it's a really safety concern, supervised visits, I encourage it, unless there's some type of court order, like this person cannot have contact with this this adult. But being in the foster care system myself, and I was grateful enough to have a support network leaving out of foster care. But someone like my foster brother who passed away last year, he didn't have a support network. His family lived all the way in Mississippi, and he really didn't have a connection with them. And so he had passed away last year, and he didn't have anyone that could care for, that could be and, take him back when he passed. They wouldn't allow my foster mom to take, his body and do an actual funeral because she wasn't his real parent. And so it kind of sucks, because he was in his 30s, homeless. And again, it's all about that permanent relationship. And I think we should try more often to keep adult supports in these kids' lives. I work at the San Diego Center for Children, if some of you are familiar with that. And I see kids every single day who get kicked out of their foster home because the parents aren't able to take care of them because of their behaviors. I mean, it is a case-by-case situation, but I think we have to be, we need to train up our foster parents more to be able to handle these specific behaviors that some of our kids are facing. And so I mean, I can go on and on about it, but having these adult supports and these permanent connections, our youth is going to be like the best option for all of our youth, so that they don't find themselves homeless or getting killed because they were out in the street, like my foster brother who got killed. And so yeah, it's all about permanency and connections and adult supports. Who's going to be able to support this kid? Who's going to be able to help help this kid navigate through their life? Someone like Jaymi, hearing your story and hearing what you do is just, it's inspiring me more. I mean, I work with kids. I'm not going to have kids of my own, but I enjoy taking care of the kids at the center, and I enjoy having my caseload with all these youth that I'm connecting them with their families or any adult support. So yeah.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable with us in this space. I really appreciate it. Jaymi, same question to you. And to our attendees, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will try to address as many of them as possible in the time we have left.
Mm-hmm. So I know we're talking about biological family connections. It's extremely important for foster youth, especially those aging out. But it's also important for kids who are reunified with their families and who go in the system and go back, and also kids who are adopted. I think that's something that a lot of us miss in the system is, oh, well, the kid's in their new adoptive family now, they have a new last name. They don't need their old family anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of people still think that way. And as an adoptive parent, something I'm constantly telling other adoptive parents, and something I tell my kids all the time, is I can love more than one kid, so my kids can love more than one mom. And it's something I say to them almost every day, because kids who are adopted or in foster care struggle with guilt when they love their foster mom or they love their foster dad. And then they feel guilty because what about my biological mom? Or a lot of kids, that's my real mom, this isn't. And they struggle with guilt and, alliances and those kinds of things. And so foster parents and adoptive parents are the ones who should shoulder that burden and say, no, like my love for my kids is not fragile. It's not intimidated. I can love as many kids as I have in my home, and they can love as many moms as they have, and as many dads as they have, and as many grandparents as they have. And something that's unique to my story is I have a lot of siblings. I'm the oldest. I raised some of my siblings through guardianship formally. And my youngest sibling, when she was 6, she went into foster care, and I attempted to adopt her. I requested placement, but by the time I had found out she was in foster care, she was bonded to her foster parents. And so they fought and they won, and they ended up adopting her. But then they ended up cutting off all contact with her biological family. Me and my siblings, nothing. She was adopted in a closed adoption. We were given no information. They moved her to a different state. And I was a safe relative. I was a social worker. I was already adopting other kids and fostering. So she was adopted in a closed adoption when she was 9, and she's now 17. And this past July, when she was 16, I got a call around midnight from her adoptive parents saying, she's a teenager, we don't want her anymore, come pick her up. And so now I'm raising my sister that I haven't seen in 8 years, because her adoptive parents got to the point where she's a teenager. They're not trauma informed. They didn't understand that her longing for a biological connection was normal. They thought it was threatening. They thought it was scary. And those connections really cannot be understated. And, I've had a conversation with them that and I've written her letters, I've reached out the past 8 years, and it's been denied. And you just think, if I had had that connection, or she had had some permanent biological connection that could partner with her adoptive parents and support her, how much stable that placement probably would have been if she had that all along. And then it can't be understated where she comes to our home and she says, I haven't seen anyone that looks like me since I was 6. And even things like our pinky toes are the same, and like how like those things are so important to kids, to know where they come from, to know who they look like. And if there is any safe relative, sometimes there's not, but most of the time there is. It might not be the parents, but it might be a grandma, it might be a sibling, it might be a great aunt. Having someone that is a biological family connection is so important. And if that's not possible, then having someone in their community. When I was in 2nd grade, I knew that my home life was really bad. And I read in a book that a godmother was someone who took you if your parents died or they went to jail. And so I asked my 2nd grade teacher one day, will you be my godmother? And she said yes. And she was at my high school graduation, my college graduation, and she's still in my life as an adult. And those are the things that we need to do for our kids in foster care, kids who are adopted, those people who can piece together the missing parts of their story for them. So it's extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Like I said before, we really appreciate the vulnerability in this space, as this is a safe space to share stories. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that it's, even with your sibling, it's kind of like a long process. And I'm learning so much from this forum myself. So I just appreciate all of you for coming on here and kind of speaking your wisdoms. We have some really great questions in the chat. I hope that we can get to all of them in these last 10 minutes, 15 minutes that we have. But one of the questions that I've seen recurring is about how do we get more youth into adopted homes versus, fostered. And so I know there was a response in the chat that was saying, Judy Nam said, I see a lot of empty nesters with baby boomers retiring at a large number. Is there any way to connect these individuals with foster youth who have just aged out to kind of help support them in these processes? I know it's kind of a grand question of fostering versus adopting, but does anyone have any, insight on that and wants to share their kind of like their opinion on that front?
I think that is great that that there are folks that want to adopt, our foster youth. And I know that there are some kids that want to be, that are in the system that want to be adopted. But as Jaymi was saying, I think that if any youth is being adopted, they should still have connections with their biological family or any other adult supports that are in their lives, because what we're finding that's happening is that once they're adopted, that's their family, they're in their, and everyone else needs to be out of it. And so we're finding these situations where the adoptive parents are like, I'm done with this kid because this kid keeps acting up, or I'm done with this kid because, whatever the case may be, and the child is being sent to a place like Polinsky or to a place like the San Diego Center for Children. We have so many kids at the center that they've been adopted, but then the parents don't want to have to deal with them anymore because of their behaviors. And I think the biggest thing is making sure that these, our parents are trauma informed, completely trauma informed, because and understanding what our youth that are in the system, what they're going through. I think that for with our foster youth, it's the same thing. Our foster parents are not wanting to be able to handle their behaviors, and I think there needs to be I feel that there needs to be a bigger approach on training our foster parents, because it's very easy to become a foster parent as long as you have a working home and you have a clean background and the home is safe for that youth. You can become a foster parent very fast. But I feel that, we need to have more training on being trauma informed and understanding what these youth are going through, kind of behaviors that they're going through. Going back to the adoptions part, some of our youth that are being adopted out, they don't understand what their culture is. And that is a really big factor, is understanding culture, understanding where they came from, who their family is. And that also goes with like family health. If a kid is being adopted out and they're being closed off from their biological family, and something happens to that child health-wise, we're going to be scrambling around trying to figure out, well, how did this kid get this? And they don't know what their family health is. They don't know what their culture is. And so again, having that support, keeping the kids connected to their families, and then also training up our adoptive and foster parents, so that they have a understanding of having an understanding on the children that we have that have trauma, serious trauma.
One thing I'd like to just add to what Larry was saying is culture it can be an important factor in the culture of that child. Even me currently are working with adoptive parents that adopted a child that is not of the same race, but yet the child knew that family, his own natural family, and knew the experiences of their culture, and now they're in a foreign, totally different environment, and see nobody that looks like them, see nobody that can relate to them. And for them, that's a very pronounced, profound kind of experience, where the foster parent thinks they're providing them a good home, and they are. But it's not, there's more than, there's a lot more to it than that for the child. So it's important that we have these kind of conversations and really find ways to link children to their who are longing for that cultural connection to people that do look like them, however that can be done. Also, it's an important thing that we have to help mentor adults. Adults need mentoring too. I mean, a lot of parents don't, whether it be foster parents, natural parents, all of us struggle. And we need somebody to help us be able to help our children. I know my daughter at times, my granddaughter's upsetting her and pulling her hair out. Who does she turn to? She turns to me to help her. So we all need, adults need mentoring too. And they need someone to help them understand and shoulder the responsibility. So they should be willing to ask for help. And we should be providing it to the parents so they can better parent. That's always a missing link. And I think that's a critical piece that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for your insight tonight. We are at time. I know there were a lot of really great questions and insight in the chat, and we wish we had time to answer all of these, but I'm sure that we will be sending out an email recapping this event along with the recording, along with contact info if our speakers would not mind sharing their contact information emails. But I learned a lot today, and I learned a lot how there are a lot of nuances within the foster care system, whether it be foster care youth or people who are foster parents, or even learning how to be a foster parent. I think that there were several questions in the chat about, resources that may or may not be available to people who want to be foster parents. So that's something that I think that we all can become more educated about. But like I said, thank you all for coming. I will hand it off to Erica for our final last words, but I just wanted to say thank you to Daphne, Larry, and Jaymi for all your time and all the work that you do. It's really beneficial, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I just want to extend thanks to both Sienna and Gabby for setting this up. They reached out to all of the speakers that we have tonight and the ones in the future for our future forums. I also want to extend the thanks to Jaymi, to Larry, to Daphne, just sharing your experience, sharing your insight and all of that, and taking time out of your day to kind of share this information with all of these people here. And finally, I just want to thank everyone that came out to this community forum, opening your hearts, opening your minds and ears to just being able to learn lots about just foster care system, as well as with homelessness and that intersection and everything along those lines. I learned a lot, and we'll just keep learning with each forum. And so I do want to remind everyone that our next forum is going to be on March 15th, Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. And it's going to be on the impact of policing on the homeless population. And I think this link will be online for a little bit longer as, sorry, please ignore that. So we'll try and collect whatever questions that weren't answered during the forum and try and send that out to the rest, to our speakers, and see if we can get those answered as well in terms of a summary for everything. But thank you everyone for coming out. Really appreciate it. Have a great and wonderful night.
You too.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.